Get that filth off your chest. Caleb Thorne's voice sliced through the air like a blade skimming over glass. Cold, sharp, and so precise it made the atmosphere inside the Gilded Lily dip a few degrees. A dry, ripping sound followed as the thin plastic of a name tag tore away. Leo, misspelled as Leo, spun once on the marble floor before coming to rest. The sound was small, but it echoed in the too-perfect space, as if the floor itself had been designed to amplify humiliation. Arthur, at this moment nothing more than Leo, lowered his gaze to the warped reflection staring back at him beside the fallen tag. The warm gold light from the ceiling lamps was so polished that it revealed the crease between his brows. It wasn't anger. It was emptiness, like someone had sucked the air from his chest. The heat stinging his left cheek pulled him back to something he hadn't touched in 40 years, shame. Around him, no one spoke. The scent of artisan-roasted coffee mingled with fresh lilies from vases on the counter. Soft jazz floated from ceiling speakers. Everything was measured to the millimeter in refinement, except for how people treated each other. Arthur drew in a breath, but the cold from the New York winter had already seeped in through the automatic door. He picked up the name tag, but didn't put it back on. Caleb had already turned away, half smiling like he'd just wiped away his stain. When the door closed behind him, the winter wind slapped his face. The chill didn't just sting his eyes. It carried a memory, sharp and heavy as the diesel smoke that clung to Chicago nights when he was 19. In that memory, he sat in a battered delivery truck, hands gripping a worn steering wheel, trying to coax the ignition to turn in sub-zero cold. His fingers were so stiff they barely bent, and lunch was nothing more than a frozen protein bar in his coat pocket. His boss back then, a heavy man in a swivel chair, called him kid and tossed his tip onto the wet truck floor. Arthur had knelt to pick it up, knees numb against the metal, and sworn he would build a place where no one would ever have to stoop to collect their dignity. Yet here he was, staring at the polished brass lily emblem on the glass. His creation, realizing the Gilded Lily had become exactly what he once despised. 3 weeks ago, during a Manhattan headquarters meeting, the executives presented flawless growth charts. Revenue up, profits steady. A vice president beamed as she announced, employee morale at a record high. But Arthur caught sidelong glances, nods that lagged half a beat, and silences that stretched a little too long after each compliment. 3 days later, he received an anonymous email with no subject line, just a single sentence. They're bleeding, and you're letting them. Arthur never put stock in rumors, but he trusted his instincts. Instead of dispatching an audit team or HR, he went old school, seeing for himself. He hung up his Armani suit, slipped into a cheap polyester uniform, clipped on a plastic tag labeled Leo, and laced up discount work shoes from a clearance rack. For days at store, 12 showed him what no report ever could. Words spoken quietly but cutting deep, eyes that dropped to avoid contact, sighs swallowed behind forced smiles. And this morning, the moment Caleb ripped off the name tag turned suspicion into certainty. Standing on the sidewalk, the current of New York flowed behind him. Inside, Caleb leaned toward a young employee, said something, then burst out laughing. The sound didn't carry outside, but Arthur felt it, a low, electric current running down his spine. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to his contacts. Not the vice president, not the COO, just one person, Evelyn, his chief of staff for 20 years, who had known him before the corner office and the hundreds of millions. She picked up after 2 rings. Arthur, his voice was even, stripped of all inflection. Evelyn, give me everything on store 12. Performance reviews, HR complaints, security logs, all of it. And Evelyn. He paused, eyes fixed on Caleb's reflection in glass. Keep this quiet. No one can know we're investigating. When he hung up, the wind lashed his cheek again. But this time, it wasn't just February in Manhattan. It was the cold of resolve, newly forged in the furnace of humiliation. He knew the investigation had begun, and this time, he wouldn't just stand by and watch the weeds grow. The paper cup in front of Arthur had long gone cold. He sat in a small cafe across from the Gilded Lily, where the fogged glass formed a perfect curtain. From here, He could watch the store through those blurred streaks, as if peering into a parallel world, beautiful and rotting at the same time. Inside, everything moved with seamless precision, lit by warm golden light and framed with customer service smiles. But Arthur knew it was just a coat of paint. He began piecing together the fragment from his 4 short days on the job. Every scene, every word, every glance, each one a slice across human dignity. He remembered Eleanor, nearly 70, small-framed but still quick on her feet as she lined up at the counter. That day, the newly installed barcode scanner had her fumbling, trying to find the adjustment button. Caleb appeared behind her, his expensive cologne overpowering the scent of coffee. Without a word, he snatched the scanner from her hands, rang up the item with a neat flick of his wrist, and slammed it onto the counter. "This isn't a retirement home, Eleanor. It's retail. The clock is ticking." She murmured an apology, eyes cast down, hands trembling slightly. What Arthur saw in her eyes wasn't just fear, it was resignation, and that was far worse. The next image was of Marcus in the stockroom. The veteran limped as he reached for a heavy box on the top shelf, face tightening, sweat collecting at his temple. Caleb walked by, glanced over, and said in a half-mocking tone, "Pain is weakness leaving the body. Right, soldier? Now, pick up the pace." Marcus clenched his jaw, stayed silent, his knuckles whitening around the handle of the box. A phrase meant as motivation in the military had become, in Caleb's mouth, a blade driven deeper. Then there was Sophia at the customer service desk. Arthur remembered how her voice shrank over the phone. Her young son had a high fever, and the teacher needed a parent to pick him up immediately. She approached Caleb, timidly asking to leave an hour early. He didn't look up, eyes fixed on the screen. "Is your son on the payroll?" "No." "Then he doesn't get a vote. Your shift ends at 5. Sophia turned away, hands clenched, tears streaming as she bent over her files to hide them. But what chilled Arthur most was a conversation he overheard in the stock area. Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed, speaking to a trainee manager. "You don't build a strong team by being their friend. You build it by being the predator. They need to know you're always watching, always hunting for the weakest one. Fear is the purest form of respect." Caleb wasn't out of control. He believed in what he was doing, and that was the real danger. The next morning, Maya, a new hire with less than a week's experience, dropped a tray of expensive glassware. The crash rang out like a small explosion, drawing every eye. She froze, face drained of color. Arthur knelt beside her at once, speaking softly. "It's okay. Let's clean this up together." He hadn't even reached for the broom before Caleb appeared. He didn't look at the shards, only straight at Arthur. "Who told you to help? Who told you to speak?" His voice dropped cold as steel. "Your job is to stack shelves, not to coddle incompetence." Then, in front of everyone, he tore the name tag from Arthur's chest, uprooting him like a weed daring to grow in the wrong direction. No warning, no further explanation. An act of kindness had shattered the order of fear he'd built, and that was unforgivable. Now, in the cafe, those images played in Arthur's mind like an old film reel. He didn't see a bad manager. He saw a sickness embedded deep, metastasizing in every glance and every silent reaction. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. On the screen was the hidden recording app. He had switched it on during Caleb's conversation with the trainee manager. It was the first piece of evidence, and it wouldn't be the last. Arthur drained the last sip of cold coffee and rose to his feet. Outside, the wind cut sharply, but he didn't zip his coat. The chill now came from something other than the weather. It came from the resolve growing inside him. He wasn't going to pull out one weed. He was going to till the entire garden. The underground parking garage beneath the Midtown office building was nearly empty on an early Monday morning. Wind hissed through the vent slats, blending with the low, constant rumble of the street above. Arthur leaned against the side of a rented silver sedan, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He didn't want to meet Evelyn at the office, too many eyes and ears there. A black SUV pulled in, its headlights sweeping a bright arc across the cold concrete wall. Evelyn stepped out, her camel-colored coat shifting lightly in the breeze. She didn't speak right away, just opened the back door and pulled out an oversized canvas bag. Inside were not documents, but items you could tell at a glance weren't for amateurs. A micro camera disguised as a screw head, a voice recorder shaped like a USB stick, a pair of glasses fitted with a wide-angle recording lens, and several compact battery packs. Arthur took the bag, scanning each piece the way a hunter inspects his weapons. "This stays between us," he said, his voice low and firm. Evelyn nodded. "Arthur, I've been with you for 20 years. I know what's at stake." He had named this operation Nightingale, a bird that sings in the dark. He would let the truth speak from the darkest corners of the store. The next morning, Arthur returned to the Gilded Lily. Not as an employee. This time, he wore the navy blue uniform of a maintenance contractor, a name tag reading Tom, and carried a toolbox. A false beard and thick-rimmed glasses made him look like an utterly forgettable technician. He passed Caleb at the entrance. Caleb barely glanced at him, suspicion nowhere in sight. Arthur hunched his shoulders, moving into the employee break room to check an outlet. In reality, he was fixing a tiny camera under the table, perfectly placed to capture conversations people assumed no one was listening to. In the stockroom, he twisted a screw-head camera into the top corner, aimed directly at Caleb's small office. Another camera went near the time clock, ready to record whenever Caleb manipulated employee hours. There was a moment when his pulse slowed. Caleb suddenly entered the break room while Arthur was kneeling, tools scattering across the floor. Arthur bent to pick them up and said casually, "Loose hinge under the table." Caleb just nodded and walked out. The door closed. Arthur exhaled, hearing his own heartbeat in his ears. Arthur's temporary 14th floor apartment had turned into a command center. The desk was cluttered with cables, computer monitors, and notebooks. The cameras began streaming crisp images, the audio clear enough to catch every breath. He watched and took notes. One clip showed Caleb blaming Marcus for a late shipment, despite paperwork proving it was the supplier's fault. Another captured him mocking a customer's appearance the moment they walked out, prompting a few uneasy laughs from staff. Once, he tore up an employee's vacation request and dropped it into the trash right in front of them. In another scene, he cornered a young female employee in the stockroom, lowering his voice so only she could hear, making her step back and clutch a stack of papers tightly. Each clip was another nail Arthur drove into Caleb's professional coffin. He tagged timestamps, categorized the evidence, and built a case no one could refute. One evening, a feed showed Sophia in the stockroom, sitting on a box, quietly eating a sandwich. Her eyes were distant, probably thinking of her son. Arthur lingered on the image longer than usual, remembering the catch in her voice the day she got the call from school. The next day, he waited at the corner near the store, cap pulled low. When he saw a delivery driver walk in, Arthur handed him a thick envelope and told him to give it to Sophia. Inside was $500 in cash and a note from someone who knows it's hard. Keep fighting. It wasn't part of Nightingale, but Arthur knew justice couldn't wait for the final day. Sometimes it had to slip quietly into the heart of the storm. A week passed, and the Nightingale file was complete. Hours of video, audio recordings, copies of internal emails, all neatly organized in an encrypted folder. Arthur sat at his desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Email subject, emergency board meeting. Body tomorrow, 9 a.m. The Gilded Lily, store 12. Attached is your pre-reading. Attendance is mandatory. We have a cancer to remove. He attached all the evidence, drew a breath, and clicked send. The mouse's click echoed in the dim room like a distant warning siren. Outside, Manhattan's night stretched on, golden light glinting off the river's surface. Inside, Arthur sat still, knowing the storm had been summoned, and by morning, it would sweep everything clean. That morning, Caleb Thorne strode into the Gilded Lily with his chest puffed out and a triumphant smile. The night before, he had received an email from the company's vice president. The board of directors would be touring his store as a model of success, even hinting at a possible temporary promotion to regional supervisor. To him, it was the perfect chance to cement his authority, to prove that his fear-based management style was the right path. The moment he stepped past the counter, Caleb clapped his hands to gather the staff. Listen up. Corporate is coming. This is my shot, which means it's your shot to not screw up. I want this place shining like the top of the Chrysler Building. No mistakes. No weakness. Got it. He moved through the aisles, adjusting the tilt of product boxes, urging employees to scrub harder, his voice snapping through the air like a whip. No one argued, but their eyes avoided his, bodies rigid as if bracing for a brutal inspection. Caleb believed he was in total control. At exactly 9 o'clock, the automatic glass doors slid open. The soft chime rang out. Every employee looked up. It wasn't the usual tour group stepping in. It was Arthur Vance in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, deep blue silk tie, walking straight and carrying a gaze cold as winter wind against bare skin. Behind him came 6 board members, the kind of powerful figures whose faces appeared only in Fortune magazine spreads or at annual shareholder meetings. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly. The jazz music seemed to fade, or at least no one heard it anymore. Employees froze mid-task. Customers turned to watch. Caleb quickly left the counter, his grin stretching wide. Mr. Vance, what honor. We weren't expecting. Arthur didn't stop, didn't shake his hand. He walked straight forward, closing the gap until only a few steps remained. Then he stopped, his voice clear and carrying across the room. I was here last week, Caleb. You might not remember me. My name was Leo. The air seemed to drain out of the room. Caleb faltered, his smile thinning. In seconds, confusion shifted to suspicion, then to horror as the pieces clicked into place. Across the store, Sophia, Eleanor, and Marcus, the ones who had seen Leo humiliated, stood frozen. The man fired was, in fact, the company's founder. Arthur's gaze didn't waver. You tore my name from my chest because I showed a flicker of human decency. You told me I was done. You were wrong. At his subtle signal, Evelyn, standing beside a display table, flipped open the cover of a large, preset screen. Without introduction, the Nightingale footage began to play. Eleanor had the scanner yanked from her hands and was mocked. Marcus was straining to lift a heavy box on an injured leg while Caleb jeered. Sophia, learning her son had a fever, only to be denied an early leave. Caleb's own words about being the predator and fear as the purest form of respect. Scene after scene, not spliced for drama, but flowing together like an unassailable indictment. Each clip was another crack in the wall of control Caleb had built, and that wall was crumbling. Eleanor's hand rose to her mouth, her shoulders trembling. Marcus bowed his head, not from shame, but from the weight of emotion. Sophia stood tall, eyes locked on the screen, tears falling, yet gaze unwavering. Caleb stood rooted, his face pale, sweat forming at his temples. He could not speak. The space seemed to shrink, every eye fixed on him. When the video ended, Arthur turned back to face him. Caleb Thorne, he said, his voice ringing in the absolute silence. You are a disgrace to the name of this company. You are terminated, effective immediately. Get your personal belongings. Security will escort you out. 2 towering security officers stepped forward. Caleb opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. He was led down the aisles, past the fully stocked shelves he had once used as a stage of power. No one laughed. No one sneered. Only the empty, watchful eyes of those who had endured him. The glass doors closed behind him. A beat of silence. Then a clap, soft but distinct. Eleanor. Next, Sophia. Then Marcus. In moments, the whole store was filled with applause. Not cheering, but the collective exhale of a burden lifted. Arthur stood among them, not smiling, only nodding, a silent apology, a silent promise. He knew the storm had passed, but the real work had only just begun. The applause slowly faded, giving way to a new kind of silence. Not heavy anymore, but as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Arthur stood in the middle of the circle of employees, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and drew a slow breath, letting it fall in rhythm with the air of the room. This wasn't just his failure, he said, his voice low but each word distinct. It was mine. I built these walls, but I forgot to check what was growing inside them. I let spreadsheets and reports replace faces and names. I am sorry. The apology wasn't like a polished press release, nor a rehearsed leadership speech. It was a plain-spoken confessional, and it dissolved the distance between CEO and staff. Sophia looked at him, her eyes red, but no longer burning with anger. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, as if weighing whether to give her trust again. Marcus stood with arms folded, but his fists had finally unclenched. Arthur didn't let the silence linger too long. He turned to Sophia. This store needs a leader who understands what dignity means. It's always had one. She just never had the title. The position of store manager is yours, effective now. If you'll have it. Sophia froze. She blinked, as if making sure she'd heard right. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she nodded, and a faint yet genuine smile crossed her face, not just for the recognition, but for the feeling of being seen and trusted. Arthur walked toward the checkout counter, where Eleanor still stood with her hand resting lightly on the scanner. He removed his $1,000 suit jacket, folded it neatly, and set on the counter. The sound of the fabric sliding over oak was soft but final. He rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms still sun-browned from a past life of manual work that had faded but never truly left him. "Eleanor," he said, his tone as if asking permission, "would you show me how this new scanner works? I seem to be a bit behind the times." She looked at him, and in her tired eyes there was suddenly the spark of respect. A real smile, perhaps the first in years, appeared on her face. "Of course," she replied. Arthur stood beside her, listening carefully as she explained each function button and how to position the product for the best read. His fingers moved slowly, deliberately. Across the store, Sophia was rearranging a display. Marcus bent to lift a lighter box but with a surer stance, and a few other employees began speaking softly to each other. Morning light streamed through the tall glass doors, catching on a marble floor, no longer casting the cold sheen it once had. The scent of roasted coffee, fresh lilies, and the steady beep of the scanner wove together into a new kind of background music, the sound of a place beginning to heal. A customer walked in, shoes brushing the freshly cleaned black mat. Arthur looked up, greeting them with a smile, the product he'd just scanned still in hand. No hierarchy, no armor of leadership, just one person serving another. At the far end of an aisle, Sophia glanced up and met Arthur's eyes. She gave a nod. He returned it with a subtle one of his own, a silent promise that things would be different. The Gilded Lily had once been built on ambition, but today, under the new morning light, it began to be rebuilt on compassion.